Everybody, welcome to part two of this series on this comparison between archaeology, or the archaeological timeline rather, of the 18th dynasty of Egypt and the biblical account of David and his line. And in the last, I was just trying to hash out Osman's premise, which was that the Amarna kings of the 18th dynasty descend from a bloodline that unites both the Egyptian and Israel, or Hebrew tribes, their heritage. And that's done through the Pharaoh, or who is described as the Pharaoh at the time of David, or excuse me, at the time of Abraham and Sarah, who's the wife of Abraham, who represents the Hebrew tribes. In the last video, I also briefly mentioned these biblical characters, David, Abraham, Solomon, and Moses, who probably going to be part 3 of this video, if there is a part 3. And in Egyptology, or in history rather of Egypt, there are the historical figures Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Amenhotep IV, and we are gonna basically draw these parallels to these characters in the Bible. And Osman's main premise, or one of his premises, is that David was based on a real historical person, Thutmose III, but the Bible for some reason places him in a different time. And we're going to explore why they would do this. We kind of hinted at it in the last video, but we'll talk about why they would do this, all the possible reasons why they would do this later. But I want to establish the actual connection, just because it can get really convoluted and really confusing if I'm just telling this to you, because there's so much to keep track of. So the first thing we should talk about then is the Old Testament, this basic genealogy rather of Abraham and Sarah. So there's a story, the famous story, Abraham and Sarah. They're really old. They conceive somehow, and then they have Isaac, and then Isaac gives way to Judah and Joseph after a couple generations rather. Isaac has Jacob, and then Jacob has Joseph and Judah. So Joseph is famous for being what's thought of as the first connection to Egypt of the Hebrew tribes. The famous story goes he gets sold into slavery, into Egyptian slavery, by his brothers, who includes Judah, and Judah is allegedly the son who starts the Davidic line. Obviously, David comes out of that area of Judah, and then he becomes the king of Judah, and then eventually the king of Israel, who then has a son named Solomon, who becomes the king after him. So this is according to the Old Testament. Now, remember in the last video I said that the Old Testament is derived from the Torah, which was written in Babylon about 600 BC. So in this timeline, when we compare to the alleged events of the 18th dynasty, the 18th dynasty goes back almost 1,000 years before when the Torah was actually written, or aka the history according to the authors of the Torah, because there's more than one, because some of they brought with them different oral histories, as well as some written ones that they had that have no longer survived. This is history based on 800 years before, so keep that in mind. You guys are familiar with the game of telephone. Well, this is sort of like that, except with this specific story regarding the Davidic line, which we'll go into later. So compare this Old Testament genealogy, or lineage rather, with the actual Amarna king's lineage of the 18th dynasty. So we're going to start with Thutmose III, obviously, because he's the Davidic parallel into real life. And his reign was 1479 to 1425. Thutmose III is known as a founding figure. He ventured past the Euphrates and conquered Syria and that part of the Middle East and the Levant. And so he's this pioneering type, not really pioneering, but he's this conqueror character, which is very true in David's case as well. Amenhotep III is his great-grandson. So his great-grandson, who ruled around 1388 to 1351 in the historical record, he marries Tai, or Tia, I don't know how to say that, who's allegedly Yuya and Joseph's daughter, or the representative of the Hebrew blood from Joseph. Because if we go back, Joseph comes from Abraham, right? Through Isaac. So Amenhotep III unites the two branches of David and Thutmose III. These two branches that we'll get into shortly. Because Thutmose had he wasn't married. He didn't have children with just one woman. He had children. I don't know who it was exactly, but it was an Egyptian queen, obviously, because the kingship goes through the mother's line, which is very interesting, and another parallel to David as well. But Amenhotep III, he represents the Egyptian side of Thutmose III's family, and then Thutmose also had a family allegedly with a Hebrew woman, which we'll get into later, who eventually comes full circle and marries Amenhotep III, uniting the two branches. So from there, they have Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten, the famous monotheistic, or largely monotheistic pharaoh, who is the first product of these Hebrew and Egyptian bloodlines. So this guy is the guy who's linked strongly to Moses, who is largely considered the most important prophet in Judaism. So, with that said, what happens if we substitute Abraham with with David, or Thutmose III? Because why would we do this? Well, there's a story. Well, before we get to that, David is famously dated to 1000 BC. So, the archaeologists, if you watched part 1, the archaeologists looked for anything dating to that time, any evidence that linked David to, like a historical David, to 1000 BC. They haven't found anything. So what Osman did is he traced the archaeological timeline back about 400 to 500 years, and then he found in the archaeological record this parallel to the Davidic kingdoms that exists as it's written in the Bible, which happens to be Thutmose III, which is, if you look at the dates, that's why there's this 400 to 500 year discrepancy. So his thinking is that, okay, there's something fishy here, and B, let's see how closely this resembles the Davidic kingdom. There are some main parallels here that he draws. So the one is the story of the marriage to Abraham's wife, which is why we will put his name here for now. Let's highlight this red just to color code stuff. There we go. So there's this famous story of the marriage of Abraham's wife. Abraham and Sarah, they go from Canaan to Egypt because there's a bad harvest, and they have to go and get food there and then come back, among other things. So Abraham tells Sarah, hey, if anybody asks, tell them that you're my sister and you're not my wife, just to avoid trouble and stuff like that. And he doesn't want it. He might get killed and they might take her away. So the Pharaoh notices how beautiful she is, and he summons basically both of them, and he asks for her hand in marriage because Abraham said that obviously that's his sister. That's what he said. So under this pretense, he marries her, and then later on finds out that they're not married and casts them out. So there's an ambiguity now as to who the father of Isaac is. And that makes that whole Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac, that gives it a whole new wrinkle, and that makes it much more interesting if Abraham somehow knew that Isaac wasn't his blood. So that's a whole interesting discrepancy there. And then David has a nearly identical story to this in the book of Samuel. He makes love with a married woman who's Bathsheba, and then Bathsheba's husband is Uriah, which literally translates to man from Ur. And Abraham is known for being a man from Ur. So that's a very, very interesting tangled web there. And then the second connection is etymology. So the Egyptian tooth, or Thut, as in Thutmose III, becomes a D in Hebrew, Dud. So Dud becomes David, or Daoud, in Arabic. So that's another really hard connection there that is pretty undeniable. Third is both are warrior kings. They're both generals. They're both military leaders that founded large empires with vast territories. So they were, like I said earlier about Thutmose III, he really expanded the empire, the Egyptian empire during that time. And David, let's zoom in here a little bit. So David first became the king of Judah, and then he expanded it to unite all of the kingdom of Israel here. Which I'll zoom out here a little bit now. So past the river Euphrates, that's going to be a big sticking point later when it comes to Isaac, because Isaac inherits those territories that were at the time held by the Pharaoh, and he's uniquely given these lands, specifically not his brothers, just Isaac, the lands between the Nile and the Euphrates. And David reestablishes the empire between the Nile and the Euphrates. So again, there's another connection here. There's a geographical connection here. And why would Isaac all that land unless he was somehow connected to the Pharaoh? And then again, according to our little thought experiment here, it would make more sense, right? And then the fourth one is the Ark of the Lord. So the Bible only makes one mention of the Ark of the Lord, and then the rest is the Ark of the Covenant. And that's when David takes it to Jerusalem, and it specifically says David takes the Ark of the Lord to Jerusalem after uniting the kingdom. Well, Thutmose III in history, he did that too. He took the Ark of his Lord, which was Amun, to Kadesh shortly after creating the empire. And Kadesh is a city in that area that some people, well, the word Kadesh, I think, it translates to holy, the word holy or something like that, and Jerusalem is known as like the holiest place. So there is that connection to Jerusalem there. Although I've read a lot of scholars think Kadesh is not, it might be some other place, actually a number of different places, but Jerusalem is in the mix there. And then there's more connections between Egypt and the Hebrew tribe, which is circumcision. So the Egyptian males up until the time of Abraham were the only ones circumcised. And that's what made them distinct. And then Abraham's covenant with the Lord mandated that him and all the males after him also must get circumcised. So it kind of Egyptianizes this line, the Hebrew tribe, essentially. So we have all these different connections between this Amarna king's lineage and the Old Testament Abrahamic line. So Amenhotep III is strongly linked to King Solomon, and Akhenaten is linked to Moses for a bunch of different reasons I'm not going to go too deep into here. Let's just go back a little bit and ask why. Let's go revisit that question. So why would the Hebrews do this? Why go out of their way to create a fictional character? Is it to just prop up their belief system, or is it to maintain their identity as Hebrews? Well, in the last episode, when the 18th dynasty ended and the 19th dynasty took over, the first thing the 19th dynasty did, the Ramesside dynasty, is they wanted to stamp out anything to do with the Amarna kings, anything to do with the link to Egypt. Because remember, Akhenaten was the product of the two bloodlines. He united the two bloodlines. So enter the story of Exodus. This becomes literally the story of Exodus that I went over in the first video, where they leave, they're cast out of Egypt, and they return back to their home. That's one of the reasons why Akhenaten is, along with his strict monotheism, which Moses was the main prophet of his own religion, which was monotheistic. Another reason why is Akhenaten, under his watch, is when this supposed Exodus happened. And again, another Moses figure, another strong link to Moses, rather. When the Torah was written, the Hebrews, or the Israelites now, they felt the same way. They wanted to stamp out all association with Egypt because of this messy time in history between the two groups. That's basically the whole premise of the whole idea. After the kingdom, let me bring this up again. So the kingdom of Judah, after after the time of David, it split off again. So David's son, I think, I mean, not David's, I think Absalom, Solomon's brother, I think. I don't know. Sometime after David, the kingdom of Israel branched off from the kingdom of Judah, and then we have this, and then the kingdom of Israel gets taken over by some, I can't remember the name, but they get taken over. The kingdom, and all the people of Israel within that divided kingdom of Israel, they scatter. Some of them go to other lands. Some of them became the Samaritans, who still exist today, I think. And the Assyrians. Yeah, I think it was the Assyrians who took over the kingdom of Israel. And then some of them, after that, the people of Israel became scattered and everything like that. So after that, flash forward to 600 BC when they're writing the Torah. It makes sense that they would write this revisionist history regarding this specific time in history, the Amarna period and such. They're basically trying to qualify their history that actually happened by editing out, but also editing out their Egyptian ties. And that's really interesting. They do this in the story of Moses as well. The story of Moses, him being born, and then to his mother protecting him by sending him in a reed through the river, and then him getting adopted by the royal family. That is an inversion of the actual archetypal story, which is found in Greek and Roman and other Babylonian traditions, which the royal son, the royal baby, gets shipped out and grows up in poverty and then comes back to reclaim the throne. In Moses' case, that's inverted. So some people believe that, including Osman and including Sigmund Freud, believe that was a deliberate cover-up to hide Moses' Egyptian origins. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. I hope this wasn't too long-winded. I was really confused when I was trying to put this together as well, and I had to reread a bunch of stuff and look at a bunch of different trees. But my whole point of this story was to let you guys know it's all based in archaeology. Osman's work is very... I don't vouch for all his work. I don't think this is 100% true, but I think it's very interesting, and I think he's onto something. And he seeks to basically calibrate, like I said in the first video, he wants to calibrate the timeline using archaeology and science and hard evidence. So that's a lot of this channel that I do is about that. It's about archaeology and carbon dating and techniques and just getting closer to the truth. That's it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you guys have anything to add, have you guys heard this before? I'm pretty sure. I mean, this isn't new. I mean, Sigmund Freud was talking about it almost 100 years ago. So, and I'm sure other people were before him. So yeah, so let me know what you guys think. I didn't even talk about Jesus in this. I know Osman has other views on Jesus that it has a lot to do with what we talked about, but that's just a whole nother can of worms that we just don't have the time to go into. So again, leave me some comments and I'll talk to you guys later.